Hey everybody, it is officially Shark Week, the moment everyone's been waiting for. We're kind of stretching it here, trying to parlay this from invertebrates, but we're not quite to uh, calcified bone vertebrates yet. So sharks do get their day to enjoy some recognition here. We've already covered skates and rays leading up to them, the chondrification process and how the skeleton's built, all the anatomy and reproduction works with these animals, which is just off the charts, especially with reproduction. Chondrichthyes gives us such a cool opportunity to look at evolutionary history all within one taxa of animals. Almost everything you see here is going to be represented somewhere else. So this is one group of animals where we can almost study every form of biviparity, ovoviviparity, oviparity, you name it. We get to see it all within the shark, skates, and rays. But we all know you're here for the teeth and the Shark Week and the spy hopping and seal jumping and all sorts of stuff. So without further ado, let's dive in with the sharks. First group we're going to talk about are the erectolobiforms. These are what we call carpet sharks, very, very popular in aquaria. They're benthic dwelling for the most part. There's going to be, of course, one notable asterisk or exception to that rule. But for the most part, benthic dwelling, a manageable size, 8 or 9 feet at the tops. So nothing too crazy. With, of course, again, the one outlier here. But really cool adaptive radiation here with features we're going to find on erectolobiforms that are dead giveaways to how they're classified, despite the fact that they don't all look the same. So let's talk about every one of these. These are all the identifying traits. So like if you're looking at profiles or a mugshot, here's how we're going to say, hey, that's an erectolobiform. First off, the most notable part, fin placement, that can get tricky depending on how you're viewing these animals. Again, a lot of them are benthic, possibly buried under sand. But mouth placement, very important. The mouths of an erectolobiform will never extend behind the eyes. Give me a second. Let's go back for a second. I know that sounds kind of weird to say. If we draw a line here, the mouth will never extend past that. So it always starts in front of the eyes. So mouth placement, really important with recognizing erectolobiforms. We're also almost always going to have multiple, sometimes just a few, but across the board, we're going to have barbels. It looks like, I guess, catfish whiskers would be a good analogy. So we've got vibraceae equivalents. That's what you find in cats, like the whiskers. We've got a tactile sensory organ. We're going to have nasal oral grooves. At this point, you guys know, you can break down all your root words. You know that's going to connect from, it's also called nasolabial grooves. It basically connects the lips or the mouth to the nostrils. So you'll find a very distinct, almost ridge, I guess a valley, technically, leading up there, obviously for chemosensory purposes. Again, keep all this in mind when we look at a majority of the erectolobiforms, but then especially how unique it is to find it in the special guest, I guess, we have at the end, the surprise erectolobiform. You're going to find all the exact same structures, just in a different format, and certainly a larger bodied size, if that's enough foreshadowing. We're going to have a spiracle, again, under and behind the eye. From previous Chondrichthyes lecture, we talked about ram ventilation and why the spiracle is so important. This should make sense to you then. With a lot of the species that are benthic dwelling and they're ambush predators, basically sitting still, you're going to want a spiracle to pump and move water through the gill slits so that the body can be oxygenated. You don't want to give away your location, so that's where the spiracle comes in. There's going to be 5 gill slits in total. Gill slits, oddly enough, are usually, I don't want to say like a dead giveaway. They're really important as far as initial, very quick field work as far as identifying and what species you're looking at or what taxa they're in. It's not perfect, just like anything else. But here we have a pretty upfront answer as far as I know this is erectolobiform or not, because the 4th and the 5th gill slit always overlap. It's a trademark for these animals. Again, like I'm telling you this as husbandry wise, as far as field work, if you're going to go the marine bio route, are you always going to be close enough to a shark to see the 4th and 5th gill slit? I don't know. So it's a useful tool as far as identification, but not always your go-to. There's some other things we're going to look at as well. So if you guys can see on your screen clear enough, try to highlight everything we just talked about. There's the 4th and 5th gill slit overlapping. Here's our barbels. If you can see right here, we've got the barbels, the nasal oral grooves, which are running up this way, and a mouth that doesn't extend past the eyes. So the mouth's only, it ends right here. Picture up top, that's more fin placement. Again, a lot of these animals are benthic, so you're not going to see anal and adipose fins all the time. That might be buried in substrate. But barbels, mouth that doesn't extend behind the eyes, 4th and 5th gill slits, all these key traits that make this animal an erectolobiform versus the other sharks. They get their name, and this is so outdated now. Scientists need to update this because of their coloration pattern. It's very reminiscent of carpet designs long before any of you were born. Believe it or not, yes, people's carpets did look like this. They need to update it and call it like disco forms, something new and updated, because no one has carpet like this anymore. But that is where they get their namesake from. Both the benthic environment they live in and the carpet-ish coloration kind of led to the creation of what we call carpet sharks. The smallest, and again, I want you to keep in mind, I already alluded towards our special guest at the end. We're going to have some size disparity with the erectolobiforms. Smallest, you're talking about a foot long, very, not strange animal. It's unique to see how evolution-wise, it's developed very much like if you guys have ever seen the inside of a loggerhead sea turtle's mouth, where it's covered in inward pointing spines and barbels. Almost the same thing here. That's why it gets called the barbel throat. Just a cool reflective look for any of you that have taken reptiles. Look at kind of that evolutionary relationship that these animals can share. But a foot long at their smallest. And ta-da, there it is, our special guest for the day, the whale shark. Whale shark, obviously the biggest, coolest, most peaceful, pacifist shark out there. We talked about this in the previous lecture with the skates and rays. There is absolutely no mistake. And geez, we even talked about this back in the energy transfer as far as the phytoplankton, zooplankton. It's no mistake that the largest animals in the ocean all eat at the bottom of the food chain, not the top. Your great white sharks, your hammerheads, everybody's excited about those. I get it. But understand there's absolutely no doubt that the whale sharks, the blue whales, the manta rays, all three the biggest in their respective categories, are the largest because they eat at the bottom of the food chain, not the top. They're all going to be platonic, peaceful plankton feeders. Um, I just always think it's such a cool correlation and like a throwback to the start of our semester, uh, understanding that these animals came to be this size from circumventing the natural order of things and feeding almost at the bottom of the food chain. They're almost vegetarians. They go that far back to eating right at the source. The second that energy gets transferred, you want to consume it, and that's why they've been able to grow so large. So, a couple things to note here. Just again, visual wise, this looks nothing like a wobbegong or a traditional carpet shark, but we've got all the similar characteristics. We've got a nasal oral groove. We've got very small spherical, and we've got the barbels here. Almost looks like a bit of a Western French style mustache. I don't know how you'd want to describe it. And again, a mouth that doesn't extend past the eyes. With the wobbegongs, which are much more popular in captivity, again, just because of an easier size, easier to manage, you'll find whale sharks in various facilities. Quite a few facilities in Japan have them. Atlanta is probably most notable in the US for housing. Don't want to speak incorrectly. They had three. I don't know if they're still at three whale sharks down at their facility in Georgia. Wobegongs, like I said, though, are much more well represented, I guess. They make for interesting animals in an exhibit because they draw a lot of attention. They draw the eye to them, but they don't take up a lot of tank space regarding like depth. You can have tons of fish and sharks swimming up top, and a wobegong makes a really cool animal underneath. If you have the pictured downtown aquarium in Denver, you have the portals you can look through and look down. So a good sized animal that really only occupies the bottom of the tank. So yeah, very well represented in captivity. Oops. As far as other species here, not as well represented in captivity, but certainly something to look for if you're going the marine route. Animals you should be able to identify and understand how they work. Almost all of them are going to have some protrusion hanging off of them, a barbel, no matter the size. Obviously, with wobegongs and other animals like it, we get multiples. But no matter what, if you see a whisker on a shark, basically, you're probably looking at a carpet shark. An erectolobiform kind of fingerprint or identification trait is that initial appearance of the barbel. Almost all of them are ambush predators, so they're going to try to blend in with their surroundings. They're going to sit and wait while blending in with their surroundings. Obviously, the exception we just saw, the whale shark. So it's difficult to describe the behavior and say, hey, if you see an animal ambushing its prey, it's definitely an erectolobiform. So not a great identifier. Again, though, barbels, gill slits, mouth placement, things like that is what we're looking for. Within carpet sharks, we have every single option available to us as far as reproduction. Again, we discussed this in the previous lecture. Oviparity, bamboo sharks. They're going to exclusively lay eggs, which we call mermaid purses. Ovoviviparity, actually, while we're here, let's cross this out. We hate this term, but it's almost gone. It's almost been officially exiled. Aplacental connection with our blind sharks, and then viviparity, which we find in nurse sharks, which is live birth with some nutritional content derived from mom. So every single modality of reproduction can be studied here with the erectolobiforms. With the oviparous species, so species that lay eggs, they've been known to exhibit, I guess, some parental care. by tucking the egg packet away in basically the glove box of the ocean. They'll produce the eggs after they're fertilized, turn around with their rostrum, so nose, and tuck away the eggs for safekeeping. With species, again, let me go back one. When we get to ovoviviparity or the appearance of live birth, blind sharks fill that niche for us. This is in no way testable material, but a hilarious aside, I guess, to how common terminology can trip us up. With the blind sharks, there's only a few known species. They get their name from the fact that they have movable eyelids. When they're taken out of the water, they close their eyes. And so, again, this is how far science has come. And it's your job to go out and make sure we keep science going. But literally, we've got an animal here called the blind shark because when they were caught, usually as bycatch by fishermen, when they were pulled out of the water, they closed their eyes. And so we called them blind sharks because we thought they didn't have eyes. You put them back in the water, the eye opens right up and they can see just fine. Again, science still needs some updating. That's why I'm still here teaching and why you're still here learning. Go out there and change the blind shark to the close its eyes out of water shark. Not nearly as trendy, I get it. But yeah, I just always want to point the blind shark out because it's hilarious, an example of how we observe an animal is definitely not an accurate representation of how the animal lives. Nurse sharks, definitely very, very popular in aquaria. They are typically, again, we're talking sharks. I don't want to say they're docile, but they are. They're typically very slow moving. They're perfectly comfortable with what you as zoo students should be familiar with, almost that stereotypical behavior where they swim in a pattern. That's how they live in real life. So it's a large animal that's going to take up the sandy bottom of your enclosure and swim in a pattern that allows guests to view it all the time. It's a pretty nice combo as far as displaying an animal goes. They also get very large bodied, especially in the females. 8 feet is typical, but upwards of 14 feet, no problem. We're going to, just before we even go ahead, we're going to see sizes differ in captivity because these animals are so well fed. The reason for that, any of you that have been to an aquarium, you've seen sharks swimming around with what should be prey items. We tend to, as keepers in general, overfeed our sharks so they don't predate on the live animals in their enclosure. For example, a shark swimming alongside a very colorful reef fish, we're like, as guests, we say, how do those two live together? Well, because why would the shark want to chase around that beautiful fish when they know they're going to have a fresh tilapia hand fed to them in an hour this afternoon? So we keep our sharks in captivity very well fed so they don't predate on other fish in the enclosure, other animals. Is it a flawless plan? No. Do they predate occasionally? Yes. But very easy to see size range grow because we're feeding our sharks so regularly so they don't eat their tank mates. So I guess the size that you see some animals in captivity isn't always a good representation of how they look in the wild. Bamboo sharks, again, we're just highlighting them here. They're not super relevant in captivity, but very relevant for shark reproduction. A lot going on here. Yeah, again, it comes from previous lecture, which we covered already. So I'm not going to go too in depth with it today. But bamboo sharks, not represented well as a species in captivity, very represented as far as the scientific study of chondrichthyes.
Hey, I have a question about feeding.
Of course.
So when, say you're a new keeper coming into an aquarium, how how would you suggest us try to remember each of the species? And like when we're feeding them, how to remember who's already been fed and who hasn't been fed?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great question. So, first disclaimer, I guess. Your respective facilities will obviously have their own plans in place. They don't just literally drop you into the shark tank and say feed stuff. Um, but this is where hopefully all your zoo classes all combine. This is really where behavior and training comes into play. Every shark, sea turtle, pufferfish at like places like the downtown aquarium where you have a huge mixed species exhibit. They're all target trained for their own feeding areas from usually from above. Um, Obviously, sometimes you have the divers that go in there and they'll toss out fish. That's really more just for guests to be like, oh look, it's gonna eat. Um, but yeah, if COVID wasn't a thing and we were behind the scenes at Downtown Aquarium, we could look down at literally colored areas as targets for these animals to show up. They'll come and eat. Later, if it's the, let's say, green area, um, the sea turtles know to come up and get their fish, and the sharks, like, it's a long process, but this is where training and behavior really comes into play. Uh, these animals are very specifically dialed into where they feed. After we're done today, if you guys have a boring Monday going on for you, uh, look up videos of how places like both Downtown Aquarium in Denver, again, Georgia Aquarium I'll bring up, target, train, and feed their animals. Um, they almost have just, it's like setting plates at the table. They have individual areas that they know that's where I get fed. I'll go on swimming. I'll come back if I'm hungry and maybe a keeper's there looking out. But yeah, it's it's something you have to be obviously trained into, but it's something that keepers work on a daily basis, making sure any new additions or all the animals that are in this in group A feed at station A. Um, does that answer the question adequately? It's really cool, but I think it goes unsaid a lot for people that think sharks and these invertebrate animals are just ruthless killing machines. Um, there's a lot of training and intelligence and behavior that goes into it. All right. If we're good there, I'm so glad that question was asked. I just think it's cool when I get to refer to all the classes that you've hopefully taken by now and everything that leads up to this point. Yes, we're doing training and behavior with sharks, skates, rays, sea turtles, maybe some animals that weren't high on your list initially. I realize not everybody wants to work with fish, but hey, if you target trained a zebra shark to come up and feed in this area, um, pretty rewarding experience and pretty cool to know that you can feed them and basically release them back out into their enclosure and they're not going to eat all their tank mates because they know where their food comes from and you've helped them adapt to that point. Uh, Carpet sharks as a whole tend to be on the smaller side. Again, wobbegongs and nurse sharks kind of get larger. Um, Here we have the collared version, notable because the gill slits are, for whatever reason, very dense and darkly colored. We also have found that they're a little thicker with the buildup of the actual muscle tissue there. Not a lot of research has been sunk into them, but we're covering them because they're carpet sharks and they deserve their place here. Then we get back to our VIP of the day, the whale sharks. On average, you're talking 38 feet, tends to be the big adult size. They can, of course, go above that. This is kind of a I think, a cool conservation reflection story. They're still vulnerable on IUCN Red List, so still in danger, not out of the red yet. Um, but a lot's being done, and it's really cool to see. I don't know if anybody's had the opportunity to ever swim with them. If you have, it's life changing. Uh, but even the way that most, not all, most places are set up, tourist destinations, things like that, they only allow one or two boats at various times of the day or the season out. They don't. You can't like overpopulate how many people are out there with the whale sharks. It's very controlled, very monitored, so the animals don't get stressed. And it's really nice to see that come from an industry that could be making more money if they just dump people off boats and let them swim. Really cool to see the fact that they have limitations set up and rules in place to make sure, hey, only 8 people in the water at a time, only 2 boats a day. They also take off time during like breeding season and things like that. So it's a small effort in conservation. We certainly can do more, but really cool to see. And I don't need to talk to anybody here about corporate greed and how horrible humans are and what we're doing to our world. Really cool to see an occasional uh, an occasional step towards a better future. It's an industry, like I said, that could be making a lot more money, that really holds back and restrains itself so that the whale sharks are okay. So very cool in that regard. Zebra sharks, again, kind of pointing this out more so for the marine biology side. Husbandry wise, zebra sharks, not super well represented in captivity, but do have a cool, noteworthy aspect of them when it comes to these ridges that run down the animal. It literally looks like the human hand. If you have a very outstretched palm and you can see kind of the ridges of your fingers coming through the top side of your hand. Um, Very unusual pattern to these animals. So yes, the animal's spotted, but it gets its name from the stripes with those ridges running down the body. We're getting closer. I know what I'm doing teaching wise. We are, of course, saving the one that everybody wants to hear about, the great whites, for last. But let's not overlook carchariniforms, uh, the ground sharks. Uh, they, I think, have some adaptations that make them certainly unique, certainly, I think, on par with the great whites. And we will get there, but bear with me. We're going to work through the carchariniforms first. This is easily our largest order species wise, so the multitude of diversity in here. They're going to have a nictitating membrane, and this is one of their unique qualifiers. A nictitating membrane, for those of you that have taken birds or herps, is when we call it a third eyelid in zoology. We typically see the animal usually going into bite. It's when they feast on their prey, roll that nictitating membrane up to cover the eye for a little bit of protection while providing some visibility. The reason I'm pointing this out here, any of you that have seen Jaws or Shark Week, things like that, you see the great whites go up and their eyes go totally white. We used to think that they were carchariniforms. They are not. They were grouped here because we thought it was a nictitating membrane. Their eyes actually do an ocular rotation, so they're rolling back in the brain. Carchariniforms are the only group here that has the third eyelid that covers them up for protection. And you'll see some pictures later, of course, once we get to great whites. But I do want to point out while we're here, jot this name down. When we look at the order for these animals, you'll see a nice little illusion when we get to the great white sharks. So because they're so widespread and diverse as far as species, they're of course very well represented in captivity. Sandbar sharks very, very popular. And they get known as kind of our common sharks because of their both diversity in numbers, behaviors, things like that. The idea that we talked about with chimera forms being kind of a wastebasket taxa, these animals do fall into that category a bit. It's not been nearly as bad, but basically we have carpet sharks, big old cool sharks, and then kind of the mid section where we're just saying, hey, you're a shark, good for you. Why don't you be a carchariniform? So there is going to be some revision soon. And I'm looking in chat right now. Somebody said the great white is overrated. It really is, in the sense of how everybody thinks of it. It's not going to be as far as the like evolutionary history of the animal, but as far as like the Jaws movies and things like that, spoiler alert, it was a bull shark. Yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. And carchariniforms are probably where we should be focusing a lot more of our research on, because we're gonna find honestly a lot of things that we, I guess, presumed about sharks to be proven and disproven within the same group of animals. This is where we're going to find a huge disparity, and I'm so glad the great white comment was mentioned just a second ago, because this is arguably your most quote-unquote aggressive species. They're arguably responsible for the most attacks on humans. And just as a full disclaimer, I love sharks. Hopefully all you do too. But I can't stand the term shark-infested waters. So please never say that in my class. Shark-infested waters is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I see it on beach signs all the time. I hear it on the news. Like, you understand sharks live in water, right? That's like saying human-infested houses. It's a very misleading quote that makes people actively go out and hunt and hurt these animals. Shark-infested waters is like saying leaf-infested trees. That's their environment. I'm sorry that the beach that you tried to section off has a shark in it. That's probably where they lived. And that comes in with the requiem sharks. Tons of modalities as far as breeding, but not only are we talking the oceans where you might visit, we're also talking freshwater. And then the in-between, that's what the term brackish right there means. Areas where saltwater and freshwater meet. Estuaries is another term for it. These are your animals that are, I can say arguably, but 100% going to result in more human, I don't want to say fatalities. That puts them on in a bad light, but certainly the most attacks. And we'll talk about the attacks too when we get to how the actual palatal-quadrate cartilage and the tongue works for these animals. But definitely responsible for way more attacks than your classic Jaws movie and the overrated great white shark. There we go. That's the culprit, the bull shark. The requiem sharks, tiger sharks, very represented, well represented in captivity. Blue sharks, a little bit. Milk sharks on the further end. But when you talk about working with animals, this might be one of the most hostile animals you can encounter. The bull shark as a whole, and I need to say this disclaimer ahead of time. I 100% do not think that pit bulls are bad dogs. So please, please, please do not. I hate even using this analogy because I don't like that all the negative publicity that surrounds them. This is basically, though, your pit bull of the dog world. Everybody thinks, again, This is not a knock on pit bulls. Everybody thinks that pit bulls are like the aggressive dog, the aggressive breed. They're always attacking. In this case, it's actually true. Bull sharks are, we can't anthropomorphize. We don't want to do that. We don't want to assign human characteristics to these animals. They're mean. They're angry. And again, just, I feel like I need to say this since this is going to be recorded. Absolutely nothing against pit bulls. But for the lay person that isn't involved in zookeeping, this is the pit bull of the shark world. Something super angry that'll bite anything that comes near it. And in this case, that bell rings very, very true. Bull sharks are just, they're bad. Size-wise, we're not going to get super impressive. An 8-foot bull shark, though, one of the weird things I should point out with these animals, no matter what their overall size is with the Requiem sharks, they're very dense. And again, I'll use the pit bull analogy now for another reference. Picture a pit bull versus another dog that size. Pit bulls are so much more heavily muscled than other dogs that similar size and build. And that's the same for bull sharks and Requiem sharks in general. They're going to be very dense. So you're not just big bodied, you're a beast. You look like whatever that guy's name is from Game of Thrones, the mountain guy. Like, not only are you decently sized, but I mean, you are ripped. You're Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson here with bull sharks. Every part of them is built for speed, attack. It's so densely packed with musculature. So and again, I'm not trying to dog on other sharks here. An 8-foot bull shark, though, is in no way comparable to another 8-foot shark of any other species. They are beasts. They're designed. They're nature's perfect killing machine. Because of that, sorry for the extra clicking. It's almost like Mother Nature decided to throw a middle finger at us and say, "Hey, I built the perfect killing machine for the ocean. Now let's let it swim upstream." And this is where the term diadromus comes in. It's easily our best known chondrichthy species for this trait. Diadromus is a term you guys hopefully are familiar with its ability to traverse both saltwater and freshwater environments. It doesn't get any. And again, I have a lot of respect for this animal. I do not want to come off as I'm talking badly about this animal or poorly about this animal. Yeah, like, you have the most aggressive species of shark ever packed into this perfectly sized, like 6 to 8 feet, so you can fit up any body of water. Super aggressive already, hyper aggressive, and now you can just swim into the Mississippi River. Yeah, Mother Nature was looking out for this one. And the diadromy with this animal really gives it a lot of credence when we talk again, and we'll see this when we get to great whites. This is the animal responsible for jaws, for an enormous amount of shark attacks on humans. Yeah, it's just, this is like, again, I know everybody's waiting for the big one, but this is the bad boy of the ocean. Bull sharks are just notoriously savage. This is, I don't know who's popular nowadays. If you guys watch UFC or football and all that, like, this is like the Tom Brady of the ocean or the Conor McGregor of the ocean. Yeah, bull sharks, they know what they're doing.
Do we find bull sharks to be a little bit harder to keep in aquariums with other sharks and other species, or should we kind of keep them towards themselves and more docile creatures that are more bottom living.
Bull sharks do okay in captivity, but for a very strange reason. Bull sharks in captivity tend to become very obese because, as we explained earlier, when you do that targeted feeding with bull sharks, you're basically constantly like, here's a fish, here's a fish. Do you need something? Please don't kill everyone. And so they become docile because they get a little heavy in the midsection to actually swim around and predate. I'll be totally honest with you guys. When we start talking a little bit later, and I'm glad that question was asked. Oddly enough, and I believe me, guys, after quarantine and being at home for a year, I wish this was true for humans. Believe it or not, with sharks like this, as they get heavier, they actually become more efficient. It doesn't impact them the way that we would see. And I'm not saying get every fish obese, but oddly enough, sharks, as they get heavier and more well fed, don't tend to show any real notable signs of decline in health. They arguably become more efficient, and that has to do with the theory with gigantothermy that we'll talk about in a bit. So the best way to keep a bull shark docile is to basically have a buffet open for them nonstop. And they will become a little more docile because it's not worth it for them to go tear apart their new chew toy. And as a result, yes, become more obese, but also become more efficient. Nature's put a lot of like really cool firewalls on this animal. You're going to get fat? Cool, you're more efficient. Going to be the most aggressive animal out there? Cool, swim upstream. And while I'm making light of it now, there's a lot of really cool science that actually goes into these animals. Husbandry wise, though, yeah, the only option you have is to feed them a lot. They can be, again, behavioral, target trained for areas to feed. I can't put my stamp of approval on working with them right now that they won't eat something in the tank, but yeah, they 100% can be kept in captivity, but they're very food motivated. I'll just say that. Yeah, and so right now, guys, I know you can't see it on the recorded video. There's been some comments in talking about very overweight bull shark, and it's from exactly that, from overfeeding. While, and again, this is such a hard subject to broach with you guys. I would never promote the overfeeding or obesity of an animal, because in multiple animals, almost every other species, it can be a pretty bad thing. I would not recommend it. With sharks, especially the carchariniforms and the requiems, and lamniforms too, actually. The more dense they get, it actually serves their body pretty well when it comes to how blood flow, movement, efficiency works. And that all has to do with gigantothermy versus poichilothermy. Yeah, I'm not encouraging anyone to get sharks obese, but for some of these heavily bodied sharks, it isn't the worst thing, and it does keep them not docile. Definitely not docile. I'm not telling anyone that you can feed a bull shark and go dive in with it, but satiated enough. Like I said, it's like having a. I can use this analogy because my dog is exactly like this. Like my dog Boone would just tear apart a 50-pound bag of food if I opened it for him. He knows no limit. At least bull sharks, once they have a bowl of food, they'll wait around till their next feeding time. Boone is the bull shark of my house. He would eat until he just didn't know what was going on. And that's usually how these animals would present themselves. But again, the feeding aspect, it goes both ways. We don't want to see an obese animal. Obviously, we're taking body condition scores. You guys know all this from previous classes. But when we get to animals like this, that thickness sometimes winds up being very advantageous for these animals. The diadromous explanation is written here on your screen. And again, while I was kind of making fun of it, of like Mother Nature just saying, hey, yeah, go up the Mississippi River, there's a lot. Like, we can't do it as adult humans, the most evolved species on Earth. We aren't even close to being able to do this. And a lot of animals aren't. The ability to migrate between freshwater and marine environments, that's one thing. We see that in salmon, right? Salmon start in freshwater, that's where they spawn, or are born rather, go out to the ocean, bulk up, swim upstream for the iconic salmon run, and then have babies in freshwater, and the adults die. I'm not trying to knock that. That's an impressive feat. What salmon do is incredible, and they're a huge keystone species, very, very important. These animals, though, that we're talking about with the bull shark are not only diadromous, so they can swim between freshwater and marine environment. They also wind up being what we call Eurohaline fish. So it's an animal that, and again, stop me if anybody needs more clarification. It's one thing to go from freshwater to saltwater and then back to freshwater. It's like packing for a camping trip. Salmon are spawned in freshwater, so they're born there. They acclimate. They prepare and bulk up for the journey out to sea. They're out at sea, and you're going to put on a ton of weight. And again, kind of for the last hurrah, make that journey back upstream again. But there's tons of chemical changes that happen within the body in order to do that. They don't just decide to swim out to the ocean. There's biological changes, morphological changes that happen to the animal. A lot's going on. With bull sharks and their osmoregulation abilities, being Eurohaline means, yes, you can go between fresh and salt, but it means they can basically do it on a daily basis. They can swim up the Mississippi River for lunch and be back in the ocean for dinner time. And as a result of this, anytime you see the word brackish, always think beach too. That's going to be anywhere where a river meets the ocean. So of course we're going to get bull shark attacks there. I mean, you could go tubing at your favorite place and encounter a bull shark. It's not out of the realm of possibility. And because of that, bull sharks are. I don't want to give bull sharks a bad name here, so I'm not going to say it on a recorded video. But bull sharks are responsible for almost all of the human attacks we find. They're super aggressive. Great whites, as we'll talk about with the Bassie Hill, which is their tongue, they're responsible for attacks. Bull sharks are more likely to be responsible for fatalities. They're there to eat you. For great whites and larger bodied predatory fish, we actually don't fit their menu items. And so very often with the great white, you'll hear about shark attacks versus fatalities. Bull sharks responsible for a lot of the attacks and fatalities that occur because they're able to inhabit your close to shore, your upstream, and your mid-ocean areas. Everywhere that we could go, like us as humans could intrude on their environment, they can occupy that area as well.
Are they seen more in like warmer waters as well too? And then how deep do we usually see the bull sharks go?
They tend to be, I guess, privy to more warmer waters. Again, part of that has to do with the fact that they do and can swim upstream. And again, guys, I want you to think about this. With warmer waters, it also implies depth, not just location. The shallower the water becomes, the warmer it gets. But one of the things we'll find with them stems from, and I'm super glad that question was asked because it ties in nicely right here, with the genetic bottlenecking, or actually in this case, geographical bottlenecking that occurred with these animals. Imagine, picture every shark you could ever think of thrown into one aquarium. One of them can swim upstream and give birth in freshwater. That's what's going to happen here with the osmoregulation of bull sharks. They're actually, from what we can tell so far, usually actually give birth in a freshwater environment. You've taken the apex predator of basically the entire ocean and let it be born in an environment that it will dominate. There's not a lot of competition for a juvenile bull shark upstream on the Mississippi River type thing. And so because of that, yes, they're typically found in warmer waters, but that's because their opportunities are so vast in those areas. Close to shore, you get all the intercoastal species, coral reefs, beaches, and the ability to go into the brackish environments. So they're capable of leaving and going much deeper from what we've observed. But for the most part, and it's a great question because I don't know how to answer it perfectly. Found more often in warmer waters, I don't think that limits them to it. It's kind of the equivalent of like a sperm whale. We know sperm whales spend a lot of time at the top layer of the ocean, but then also occasionally go down and dive and eat giant squid and mystery creatures from the depths of the ocean. Same would be said for the bull shark. They just have a lot more opportunity in those warmer waters. And part of that comes from this geographic bottleneck that occurred with these animals. The only explanation we have is that they basically got isolated from the rest of sharks and they got stuck almost in brackish environments. A couple things occur here. With this bottlenecking, we always see weird genetic mutations. Sometimes bottlenecking results in negative side effects. A great example of that would be the Florida panther, which is our equivalent of the mountain lion. But in Florida, they suffer from things like cryptorchidism, which is when the testes are retained in the body. Almost all the males are basically sterile. There's a reason they're endangered. They've been isolated with no genetic diversity for so long that their entire species has really suffered. Here we have a different route explored. We have a couple theories as to why this occurred. We think it happened around the most recent ice age. And one of the theories out there is basically a group of sharks gets isolated. And just so you guys know, the theory is much more complex than what I'm telling you. There's tons of really well done papers about it. I'm going to give you the cliff notes. Basically, a group of bull sharks gets sandwiched between freshwater, land, ocean, and then surrounding all that, encapsulating them, is an iceberg. And as, of course, the ice melts, that leaks freshwater in. So it's like a drip acclimation. The animals get used to freshwater and develop all these unique traits. The kidneys, livers, gills, they're able to regulate the salt intake and perform osmoregulation on a level that's just, it's astounding what these animals can do. Again, I always think one of the funniest things out there is the biggest risk to oceanic species is dehydration. You don't think about how much a shark has to drink as it swims through the ocean. They have to drink almost constantly as they swim in the ocean, and then they have to actually worry about being overhydrated when they're in freshwater. So their ability to manage water levels, salt levels, and traverse seemingly without any effort on their part really tells us how long these animals have been isolated. Now they're back in with the whole gang, but yeah, these animals have been doing their thing for a long time. The breeding process, again, is kind of something that they've added to their repertoire. The ability to swim upstream and deposit your offspring in an environment that you know you're going to win, what animal wouldn't take advantage of that? It's like putting your kid into the school for X-Men gifted youngsters. Like, of course, every parent's going to want that. You have the ability to drop a bull shark off with rainbow trout. Like, yeah, I'm going to put my kid in that school. So the I personally, and again, guys, there's a lot of research out there. I encourage you all to do your own. I personally think that this is a after the fact or an afterthought of, hey, I know I can do freshwater now. I found a better environment. I don't think it's the evolutionary timeline that everything followed, but it certainly is a theory, and of course, great arguments behind it. But I just don't see this shark deciding, hey, everybody else out here is beating me up. I'd like to go have my kids in freshwater. I see this much more as a side effect of being able to traverse those waters. But again, 100% guys, that's just my opinion. And yeah, in the comments right now, somebody just mentioned, I'm glad they did. The fact that, yes, being in saltwater does nothing but dehydrate you. You have to regulate so much salt. And these animals, as they swim, usually have their mouths open and they're constantly taking on water because the biggest risk you run in the ocean is dehydration. Every animal that steps, including us, that steps foot in saltwater has to start being worried about getting dehydrated. And we've talked osmosis before. The bathtub scenario, how actually your cells are being flooded with water because we have a higher salt content than the environment around us. These animals are able to mitigate both freshwater and saltwater problems that would arise. So this is your bit of cool trivia. Hopefully all of you have seen Jaws. It's Spielberg's masterpiece that resulted in a ton of great whites getting killed for no reason. Because they made this giant monster shark, this man-eater, out to be a bloodthirsty machine. It's not. They've gone back now. And if you guys are like huge Jaws fans, I hate to break this dream for you. They've gone back and all but confirmed without shaking the hand of the shark that it was a bull shark that inspired the movie. The two fatal attacks that occurred were in the Jersey Shore, not out on this boat and shooting missiles at sharks and all that fun stuff. They were borderline in fresh water, like brackish, but yeah, pretty close to freshwater. And the bite pattern, dentition, size, everything, all leads us to believe that it was bull sharks responsible for the Jaws movie. And again, please, you can still watch the movie. It can still be iconic if you liked it. This movie, though, doesn't become popular if this animal... Oh, there's a cool shark mouth. Rawr. Is about 6.5 feet long. Nobody's going to be scared of that. Honestly, though, it's probably exactly what happened. Again, dental patterns, even teeth found in the victims, suggest about a 6.5-foot bull shark, not a 40-pound yacht wrecking machine. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to switch paths and go the theatrical route and try to remake Jaws with a 6-foot bull shark, go for it. I don't think it's going to sell as many tickets, but it is what it is. And honestly, bull sharks are just like that. They're mean. They're cranky. Uh, they don't want you anywhere near them. They will bite anything that moves. Uh, and again, I'm not trying to anthropomorphize. I know we don't like to say like this animal is angry. I'm sorry, but I'll break the rules here. Bull sharks are just kind of angry. They're kind of jerks. Uh, I think it's okay to say that with an animal with a bull shark's nature. So now that we've broken and shattered all the dreams of Jaws, let's move on to the best of the rest. And here we have obviously a unique looking, but a very unique outlier when it comes to the hammerhead. This is, I think, as cool as bull sharks are, as aggressive as they are. Hammerheads, I think, give us the weirdest opportunity to research an animal that is so incredibly unique. Obviously, their appearance is unique. I don't need to tell you guys, hey, please look at the picture and notice that their head is shaped like a flat hammer. But the way these animals actually conduct their lives is so off the beaten path. It's until you guys go out there and send me a postcard, it's borderline like unexplainable. They're nocturnal. Meaning they feast at night. That's when they go out to hunt. During the day, they all aggregate, even though they're not social animals. These animals also have ram ventilation as a requirement, something we talked about at the start of this lecture with chondrichthyes in general. We used to think that all sharks had to keep swimming in order to breathe and respirate. These animals do. But man, we just have so many weird characteristics here. First off, that we call it inferior. So at the bottom or on the underside, inferior mouth placement. This tells us that the animal is going to feed from the bottom. So it's going to scoop up crabs, skates, rays, some other chondrichthyes. Whereas let's again take great white or bull shark or whatever. You're going to have that huge gaping maw that opens up this way, and you can eat anything in front of you. This animal has to predate on something underneath it. So we know that they feed from the bottom. This ties into why their heads are formed like this, into what we call the cephalofoil. Cephala meaning head, foil meaning flattened. And this is the analogy I would use in class. Basically, picture, and we'll talk about the Ampullae of Lorenzini in a second, because it's really cool as well. It deserves its own lecture and its own slide. Basically, all sharks have a sensory organ in the rostrum or the nose. It's able to detect and pick up on electromagnetic pulses, i.e. heartbeats, even in some animals. But picture this basically like a metal detector. If you had a metal detector, would you want it to be the size of, say, your fist or the size of your outstretched arms? And that's what the cephalofoil does. It allows these animals to spread out their best sensory organ across a really wide plane. So they're cruising along looking at the bottom of the ocean, and they have a much better metal detector. They're able to scan and sweep and sense everything around them much better than your typical shark would, because they've basically taken something and flattened it out. Combine that with the eye placement that allows them to see above and below their bodies, and then that superior or inferior mouth placement. It looks a little goofy maybe to some of you, but it's a really efficient model. It's almost surprising that other sharks haven't adapted to this. They're able to perfectly operate with what their agenda is. To further complicate things with the hammerhead shark, And again, don't worry about the Ampullae of Lorenzini yet. It's coming up. It's spreading out the metal detector and making it larger. This is just the text for it. The weirdest thing about them has to do with their social structure and the way they interact with one another. This is an animal that, exhibits ram ventilation, so they have to constantly swim, meaning that even when they're asleep, they're swimming. And they don't really sleep. They kind of go comatose. I guess a better analogy would be like they kind of go into screensaver mode. It's still on. You can click on it, and the computer will turn on. But in the meantime, the animal's gonna be in. I guess screensaver mode is a good analogy. They aggregate as adult, solitary, predatory hunters, and let me see if there's a good image of it. I think there was, but all right, I'm gonna have to do it myself then. All right, picture as a kid, or I'm not judging if you have one. The old school 2-liter bottles, two of them connected to one another, and you used to shake them up, and you'd get that cyclone basically started inside of it. That's how these animals swim during the day when they're asleep. They create almost cyclone with that 2-liter bottle image. Hopefully, you guys all know what I'm talking about. And from what we've studied science-wise, that seems to bode really well for them as far as not expending any energy. They start that, again, kind of cyclone or tornado shape. It seems to, again, we can't talk to these sharks because they're sleeping. It seems to help them energy efficiency wise. The water's almost churning in that exact pattern. And so literally during the day, you have this giant horrifying cyclone of adult hammerhead sharks that as soon as the sun sets and night hits, these animals break apart and like, whoa, hey, I didn't know you were sleeping here, bud. Go off on their own, eat, do whatever their interests are. And this is just me personally. To be honest, it's almost a shame there's not more research being done with that social structure, because there's something really weird to be said about an animal that's completely solitary, aggressive, bottom dwelling, but then swims up into the water column, creates its own cyclone with all of its peers, and passes out. Excuse me, guys. Something odd is going on there that really, again, hopefully that piqued your interest, that maybe you guys will go out and study, because there's a lot more that needs to be researched there. It doesn't make sense for solitary animals to almost shack up for the night in a weird comatose screensaver tornado, and then they can kind of wake up and like not even wake your buddy up. You just swim away. A lot going on there with the social dynamics. All right, for everybody who sat through it this far, we're here. It's time for the lamniforms, the mackerel sharks. Very popular group of animals here, with a few unknown outliers. There's going to be some animals discussed in here that might be, I don't know, I guess confusing as to why they're grouped here or categorized here. Great white's going to be one of them, but we're here. It's the moment you've all been waiting for. But these are our fish of prey. The, again, kind of weird ones will pop up, and we're going to discuss them quickly before we get to great whites. One thing I want to note before we get into that is we're going to talk about great whites because that's what everybody wants to, but this is true for every animal within this group, within this taxa. So as far as just visual observation of the animal. Fin placement, yes, but like I told you guys, depending on where you're observing these animals, it can be difficult. Typically, though, you got one dorsal, one adipose. That's not always going to be the first thing you want to see. Yeah, again, fin placement is just more for your general knowledge. It's not like you can be out swimming in the ocean and immediately identify a lamniform. We have to dive a little deeper with the biology and anatomy of the animal in order to understand what's happening here. This is why nictitating membrane is highlighted again. We thought for the longest time that great whites were in the carchariniforms. Because they had a nictitating membrane, they do not. This is a telltale sign of how we got it wrong just by visual observation. Lamniforms versus carchariniforms are I think the best scientific example of how, until we do our research, we don't always know what we're talking about, and things can change in the zoological process. So this is the telltale sign of a lamniform versus the other animals. They're gonna run a higher body temperature than the surrounding water. Maybe if you've taken birds, maybe if you have some fish knowledge, you've heard the term poichilotherms. Poichilothermy is when an animal can survive and function basically within whatever range they're in. Meaning if the water temperature is up or down, the animal is doing okay. It probably prefers one temperature. But poichilothermy is pretty tricky. A lot of birds can exhibit it very well. All fish, some anguilliforms, which are eels, operate this way as well, though. Almost all your fish exhibit poichilothermy, where they have a specific range that they want to live in, but they can operate if that temperature fluctuates a few degrees here or there. Lamniforms break that mold. They're going to always run hotter than the water around them, which, again, at this point in your zoo careers, you probably think of a mammal. We operate at our own body temperature, warmer than whatever the environment is around us. So really, outside of lamniforms, this isn't exhibited until you jump all the way up the evolutionary timeline into mammals. And again, you wouldn't ever be able to visually observe this on an animal. Certainly, please do not go up to a great white shark and try to put a thermometer under its mouth. So while not observable, this is how we know lamniforms are lamniforms. A few notable lamnies to talk about before we get on to the big show, the grand finale. Thresher sharks, tail usually longer even than the body of the animal. It's designed for really great turning, and basically they flap that thing around and stun or paralyze fish. Then they'll turn their entire body, come back and eat all the stunned prey. Basking sharks, the second largest, obviously behind the whale shark. So our second largest still living fish. Barely anything known about the next two sharks, both basking and the megamouth. We know they're filter feeding. Again, throwback to our previous lecture of energy flow and why these animals are able to get so large bodied. Very, very limited knowledge of these animals. I mean, there's debate out there even as to whether or not we know their actual natural range. Like there's a lot of people that think they could live deeper in the ocean than we can explore right now. Their method of feeding, however, suggests to me anyway, just from a scientific and logical standpoint, the way they feed, the size they get, tells me that they have to be pretty close to the ocean surface to be collecting all this organic material. I can't imagine a filter feeder living in the depths of the ocean and still getting to that size range. Until I get to experience diving into the Mariana Trenches, like I'm not going to confirm that fact, but the size they get to and the filtration process they go through suggests that they live in shallow waters. We should have seen more by now. They're probably really, really in trouble. Megamouth fills almost that exact same niche. In fact, this animal for a while was thought to be a fraud, like a internet spoof. It's almost like Loch Ness monster worthy. Even current discoveries are sometimes debated and picked apart. Like, nope, that's Photoshop. That definitely wasn't a megamouth. Very, very rare animal. Again, if this lecture has inspired you, hopefully you guys can go out and send me a picture, a selfie, hanging out next to a megamouth. It's the only
Alex,
animal here. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to chime in. That last summer, August of 2020, the Smithsonian Zoo actually got a specimen of a megamouth shark from Taiwan to study. So hopefully we'll have more information on it soon.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Thank you for mentioning that. That's awesome. I never bring up the Smithsonian because so many people haven't been there. It's I don't know. It like if you like animals and zoology, like please eventually put that on your bucket list. Get out to DC. It's expensive to go out there and stay, but the zoo and the museum are free if that helps. And yeah, the Smithsonian did get one when I was out there, and this was probably 3 years ago now. They also have, since we're on invertebrates, they also have a giant squid specimen out there. And they have a coelacanth, which is crazy. That's your fish that leads to us walking on Earth. Lots of really cool, I don't know, just nerdy moments if you're a zoo person to do out there. So thank you for bringing that up. And yeah, I didn't realize they got one just this recently. So I will be visiting again, I guess. Here's one of the fan favorites, the old Goblin Shark. An animal that is very not well studied, but very popular because of, and I don't think I need to tell any of you guys in this day and age with the internet and YouTube and video sharing and zookeeper Facebook pages, things like that. Obviously very famous for the way the jaws protract. Again, this is part 2 of 2 when it comes to chondrichthyes. No animal in the world exhibits palatal-quadrate cartilage like these animals do. You can see here that, again, the analogy we used before was that mousetrap being thrown forward. That's what's happening with the jaws here. Jaws able to protrude so far from the skull. It's alien-like. And again, super cool animal. We have to throw them in here because they're just awesome, but not a ton known. There's anytime we don't even know how many species there are, it just tells you, hey, it's either nocturnal, lives underground, lives in the ocean, don't have the money to go study it. So certainly noteworthy. We're using it as a great example of how the palatal-quadrate cartilage functions. But yeah, just go out there and study goblin sharks, please. Go do it. Sand sharks are very popular. These animals, and I know the question was brought up earlier with bull sharks. These animals, in my experience anyway, tend to be arguably the best shark specimen to keep in captivity. And this is not a knock on any other facility that keeps any other shark. I just think this right here is your winner. They're extremely menacing looking. Teeth that don't even close into the mouth. So guests are obviously going to be excited to see that. Teeth that don't actually get concealed. Very large bodied. You're talking 10 to 11 feet. And very, very receptive, I guess. to targeted feeding and things like that. So you can have a 10-foot giant, gaping, open mouth, razor sharp teeth everywhere, shark swimming around, and it really doesn't care about anything else in its enclosure as long as they know that they can go get fed. So you're going to see a lot of sand sharks if you work in an aquarium. And I personally, having fed them, worked them, seen them, think they're probably the best shark outside of nurse sharks. Again, nurse sharks are a lot more docile. This is your kind of the bad boy you can keep in a facility. Our next one up is the crocodile shark. Again, you can even tell just from the image on your screen, very understudied, because first off, it's not menacing. Second off, you can tell it lives deep in the ocean just by looking at it. And so only one known species here, but does have a unique quality to it that makes it very studyable. When it comes to basically their buoyancy, we call it vertical migration. And vertical migration happens when instead of, we see it with a lot of bird species, and I guess Colorado is a good example. It'd be like moving up or down the mountains, but not out of Colorado. So different buoyancy, different sea levels, things like that. You're moving up and down the water column, but not really changing kind of your spot on the map, if that makes sense. All right, then we get to the true mackerel sharks. We've covered everything. You've all been very patient. You've waited long enough. It's time to get to it. Here with the true mackerel sharks, we've got, of course, the great white. All these animals, just so you know, are referred to occasionally as the white sharks in general. It's because of their counter shading. Again, this is kind of a throwback to what we talked about with the bull shark. They're very heavily built. The bull shark's definitely a unique outlier within the carchariniforms. Here we have an animal that no matter what size they are, if you put them up next to another shark of the same size, these animals will be very, very dense. And I'm talking packing it in. Twice as heavy occasionally, which is unheard of. If you have 2 8-foot sharks, for one to weigh twice as much, but still look the same body size, tells you how densely muscled they are. You know that there's a lot of power packed into these animals. Here we've got counter shading. It'll show up in case you need the notes on another slide. But this idea of being white on the bottom, dark on top, very popular adaptation for the ocean. It means anything looking from above, you'd blend in with the substrate. Anything looking from below, you'd blend in with the surface of the water. But that's not what we're here for. We're here for more crazy great white stuff. This is an animal that it even pains me to say it. As much as it's been popularized, we still don't know everything about. Obviously, it's a giant monster of the ocean. You can't exactly like hop onto it and follow it for a couple of years. We can put trackers on them. You can certainly dive in cages with them, but they don't exactly give us the opportunity to study them. That's amplified by the fact that they cannot be kept in captivity at all. They cannot survive in captivity. And that even that comes with its own just crazy, amazing setup as to why these animals are so advanced. So from what we know, females are far and away the largest, larger than males. You're talking 18 feet, probably average, as far as a fully mature adult female, up to 20 feet. They're big, and I'm trying to say this with all due respect to great whites. They're big, but they're nowhere close to the imagery that has been shown both in movies and the internet and things like that. it doesn't mean that they're tiny little weak fish. They're still a force to be reckoned with. It's just not on par with or on scale with some of the stuff that's portrayed in the media. It is the largest macropredatory fish even today. It's astounding that an animal that's predatory could get this large. And what I mean by that is think about on land, all your mammalian species. Yeah, lions and tigers are big, but we're not talking anything that broaches 20 feet. It tells us a lot about the animal's efficiency with bioconversion of the food it eats, how it hunts, what it's seeking out, and things like that. The only known predator to these animals is, of course, man, because why wouldn't we be? We're up there on the list for a lot of animals, unfortunately. But the killer whale falls on the list of the predator as well. And one of the interesting aspects of this, there's only been a couple great whites being killed by orcas that we've observed, that scientists and biologists have been able to observe. When it happens, a couple of unique things go on here. First off, the only thing that the orcas are going to eat are the liver and the tongue, oddly enough, of the great white shark. But the way they actually predate on them is very strange. We always think, and again, I don't know everybody's cetacean knowledge, orcas are arguably one of the meanest animals out there. You'll constantly see them like throwing around seals just for fun, and they toy with their prey almost like a cat toying with a mouse type situation. Orcas don't just bull rush the great white shark. They'll actually swim up alongside of it, almost like a, why can't I think of it? There's 12 of them. Fast and the Furious movie, where you have all the cars line up along the side. They'll actually line up alongside them. And then what they do is they basically hug the animal, a side or a shoulder hug, and they'll invert the shark. They flip it over. And for those of you that don't know, for sharks, the Ampullae of Lorenzini, which is the detector they have in their nose, basically goes haywire if the animal's inverted. And they very quickly, it's like sensory overload, they very quickly go into a comatose state. So they don't even attack the great whites. They flip them upside down, wait for them to pass out, and then eat the tongue and the liver and allow the rest of the corpse to fall to the bottom. And again, this is a very limited sample, but very weird behavior when it comes to this active predation of great white sharks. The IUCN status of these animals is, I guess, on the rise. I guess doing okay, considering where they were. Again, hopefully you guys all know your history. After the movie Jaws came out, these animals were just slaughtered. Like there was a manhunt / shark hunt to just round these things up. People were scared to go anywhere near an ocean, kill all the great whites. It was bad. They have climbed back a little bit, but because, again, how difficult they are to study, we can't get an accurate count. We don't know where to place them really on the IUCN or CITES appendix. The animal itself, hopefully you're looking at the top of your screen right now and seeing, where did this name come from? We just talked about carchariniforms. They clearly used to be categorized there. And again, the nictitating membrane was a big part of that. We thought because of that eye roll or the eye placement that they did fall into that category. Since then, we've learned, but their scientific name has remained unchanged. So where we do know our studies, and again, I just want to remind everybody as we talk about this, if we have a very isolated subject or an isolated grouping of these animals in which we're studying, that doesn't mean it's representative of the entire group. I'm simply going to teach you what we know about these animals, but there's a lot more to find out. One of the most isolated and densest population of these animals is on Dyer Island in South Africa. This is where a lot of the studies are done, but as we'll find out in just a second here, a lot of that has to do with prey selection. Their predation habits really depend on what age, what size, what stage of their life they're in. So when we talk about great whites like jumping out of the water to catch seals, that's a very limited experience in these animals' lives. There's a lot more that takes place outside of that. Shh. We're talking great white sharks, buddy. So, interesting note here. As we've studied these animals, we've just found out so much more. Somebody mentioned earlier how cool the Hammerhead Shark social network was. Same thing here, where we thought these animals were just swimming around waiting to crash our boats and eat us. Yeah, turns out we were way off. There is some crazy behaviors with these animals. The lack of knowledge we have for these animals is just astounding to me. Again, as popular as they are, students should definitely be like, it feels weird to say, like, I want to grow up to study great white sharks, but it's actually needed in the field. It's a very weird occurrence. Arguably the most popular, iconic ocean dwelling animal, and we don't have a lot of answers. One of the things we found too was as these animals move, we found they do incredible migrations, but they also do it at different depths, which raised a lot of suspicions initially. We think we know the answer now, but that's very unique for a fish species. So basically you head one way toward at the ocean surface. So let's take Hawaii to South Africa along the ocean surface. And then when you come back, you're much deeper. And actually, it's the other way around. I'm sorry, I was just throwing out an analogy there. And what we found is because it directly correlates to what prey items they're eating. This is where the study comes in. And there's a couple names for it. White Shark Cafe is the most popular and arguably the funniest. We have these sites that and again, guys, I'm sorry, I'm trying to put into words just how silly it is to me that we don't know more about these animals. We have a group of animals that we know comes to, let's say, Dyer Island or Australia or Hawaii. And we know they're there. We study them. We take our observations. That's like taking a Polaroid at any point in your life and pretending that's how you live. It's like the, what is it, Facebook memory thing and pretending that's still your life. Things change, things adapt, things evolve. And certainly we've learned the great white shark has done so. I'm looking in comments. Yeah, a bunch of updates on IUCN. That's always actually a great indicator of where maybe some jobs are opening or money's being poured into. So always take a look at the IUCN. If a species gets updated, it means at least someone's studying it or looking into it. So while hopefully it's always good news, it's not, just FYI. But again, our lack of knowledge about our own oceans does lead to some confusion when studying sharks.
And there's constantly like updates that need to be done to the IUCN Red List, and like they have the information given out, and then we have to go back and re-update it because we found something new. And there's so many animals that from either just the oceans themselves and then on land that need to be restudied or relooked at, and there's just not enough people looking or enough funding, I should say, going towards any of these animals too, which makes it harder for like us as keepers and people after us going into these fields looking and trying to help these animals, either on the zoo side or helping them out in the wild too.
It's such a great point, and it pains me to even get into it because it honestly kind of sucks, guys. It's so brutal. Like a lot of the times you'll go and you'll look at if a species endangered. I think back in the day, mammals class used to have to look into the IUCN and find an endangered animal. Sometimes those things are from 10 years ago. Like there's species that are extinct, and it's tough. And this, please, 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 do not take this as a knock on the IUCN. They're the only ones doing anything to count these populations. So they're trying their best. But yeah, it can be on the, I don't want to say depressing side, but on the very hopefully wakes you up side of things. Man, it's rough. You go in and look at some of these numbers and they're bad, but they're also bad from 2006. So you got to wonder what's been going on. Are these animals not even worth going back and counting again? So yeah, really great point just brought up. And yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but at the same time, hopefully that's why you're all here, is to update those numbers, give us some good news, I hope. Yeah, it's tough, and there's simply not, I know funding was mentioned. Believe me, guys, I'm almost positive that if there was millions of dollars to be made in the animal counting field, we'd all just be out doing that instead. So yeah, it's rough. I don't want to go down that whole rabbit hole because I will. Yeah, I don't know. Just hopefully use that as inspiration. That should be why you're here. I guess I'll just say that. Go out and study these animals. Get me an accurate count. Send me an update. Come guest lecture for me. That's why I'm doing my job and why hopefully you guys are all taking this course to go do your jobs. Really quickly with these migrations. From what we've found, we've categorized these animals as solitary man-killing monsters. Yeah, we were way off. There's populations that exist that we can't even explain the makeup of them, meaning we don't see any patriarchy, matriarchy, dominant male, and cohort of females, offspring. It seems, and again, I'm not trying to anthropomorphize here, but this is the best way I can explain it. It just seems like whatever great whites get along together kind of hang out. They form their own cliques. The difference in buoyancy has to do with what prey they're eating. If you're eating a lot of fish, sharks as a whole are able to adjust their buoyancy via their fatty livers. Fish, not super high in fat. If you're eating elephant seals, no offense at elephant seals, I'm not body shaming, very high in fat content, a lot of blubber. So you naturally almost ride higher in the oceanic current if you've eaten seals versus fish. So we're just finding out a ton about these animals. And again, hopefully this is like, I hope this is inspiring to some of you. Like, okay, I thought everything was known about great whites. I didn't have to study them. Now I know there might be a job out there. Like, go study great white sharks. That should be on everyone's like top 3 future employment situations. Studying great white sharks, watching them eat. Yeah, just it's such a shame that we have such a cool animal and still can't answer a lot of questions about it. I mentioned this earlier, but here's your text for it. The counter shading coloration, where we have dark on top, light on bottom, allows them to really diversify their prey species they want to consume because they can predate something below them or above them. And while Shark Week and things like that, I kind of iconicize them eating seals and things like that. That's only when they get big and strong enough. I don't know if you guys know it. Like elephant seals are bigger than great white sharks. Elephant seals they're big, they're thick. They don't mess around. They're a very formidable opponent. A lot of the time, you have great whites starting their lives off eating inferior fish below them, and they work their way up to mammalian prey. That's their goal. And so counter shading allows them throughout their life to predate on above or below prey, if that makes sense. Again, I mentioned this earlier too. Here's just the text for it. Their size is not anything to joke around about. They're very large, but thanks to forced perspective, the internet, YouTube, Facebook, movies, like you name it, obviously their size has been really, really exaggerated. You take a great white, it's half the size of a whale shark. Still nothing you want to mess around with, but just had to burst that bubble real quick as far as, I don't know, just, I don't want to take anything away from the great white. It's iconic, it's super cool, but they're just, it's kind of like dinosaurs. For me as a kid, I always thought dinosaurs were like taller than buildings. Finding out T-Rex that I could like ride on him, I always thought like his tooth was as big as I was. But it's like never meet your heroes type thing. So they're big, but they're not as big as they are in, I guess, the media portrays them. As offspring, they are gigantic, just FYI. They grow incredibly quick, but they need to. So let me just get this out of the way. The entire goal of a great white shark is to get big and strong enough to take down a seal. You're basically roughing it in the meantime. You're having to eat fish, other chondrichthyes, things like that. But that's not your end game. What you want to do is get big enough to tackle seals, then you've made it. And with that, this is probably why, and again, going back to what was said earlier about the IUC and red list and new shark counts, anytime we have this massive wipeout of an animal that takes 20 or 30 years to sexually mature, we don't know how far back we've reset that clock. It's one thing, and again, I'm not condoning the slaughter of animals of any species, but if, let's say tomorrow we all decided let's go kill rabbits, that population would bounce back a lot quicker versus having to wait 30 years after we slaughtered all the adult females of great white shark species. It sets things back much further than we anticipate. First off, you've left all these orphaned sharks out in the ocean. And now, in order for them to even have a next generation, we're talking 30 years out. So we've got a time span for doubling our population that we're not even able to stick around for. If you picture every great white shark living about 70 years, nobody's going to be, and maybe you are, I'm not saying you, nobody's going to be a marine biologist swimming with great white sharks for 70 years to see if there's even another generation that follows up. And so it's one of these things, again, I can harp on this all day. We never see the impact of what we're doing when it's outside of our own time spectrum. Like what the movie Jaws did devastated this population to the point where we won't even know if it recovers. We will literally not be around long enough to know if great white sharks go extinct, do fine, populate the earth and come on land and become our president. Like, I don't know. But with a 35-year sexual maturation and a 70-year lifespan, we're going to get to observe about 1.5 generations. And that's even maybe half a generation while we're in the field. The rest we're in our cool, comfy wheelchairs, sitting around, hopefully following up on the next generation. It's astounding how short-sighted I guess we are. And I apologize for going on a weird rant about conservation, but I kind of think that's my job. Anyway, juveniles when they're born, they're gigantic. I mean, this is survival of the fittest at its finest moment. A 4-foot baby? Are you kidding me? I don't think anybody wants to sign up for that. it means that the offspring are developing inside mom for so long that they come out ready to go. We're not talking rabbits or mice here. We're not talking, I'm going to have a couple and hopefully the strongest survives. You're talking, I'm going to give birth to a 4-foot great white shark. You're going to be looking pretty good in the ocean. Not too many predators associate with that. Plus, you're going to swim around with mom for a while. So yeah, it's a very intensive process, but I think it really exemplifies what survival of the fittest actually means. You pass on your genes, and the only thing that matters is that your offspring survive. And when you give birth to a 4-foot baby, yeah, I think we've accomplished it.
Alex, I'd like to chime in really quick
Of course.
because I knew this specific one was coming. I did a little research, and I thought it was astonishing how just one media movie can change people's minds about an animal, because from 1950 to current day, there's only been about 600 confirmed deaths from great white sharks, yet there are over 600 deaths due to deer in 1 year. So I just thought it was amazing how our perception of an animal that barely harms people, but we see Bambi and we think, oh, it's such a great animal, yet they kill more people every year. And like the other part was, somebody once told me that a great white shark is like a big giant ogre without hands. He can't grab anything with his hands, so he has to use his mouth to figure out what it is. Unfortunately, he's so strong and has giant steak knives in his mouth. It's usually him hurting something without intending to.
Oh my gosh, I love it when this happens, guys. Just so you know, when somebody brings up something that's going to come up in lecture 2 that we can highlight again, this is why I do this job. Like, yes, we're going to talk about, after the Ampullae of Lorenzini, we're going to talk about the Docile and cookie cutter sharks. That's their sensory. That's like, you've all seen a little kid out in public. What's the first thing they do? They pick something up and put it in their mouth. Sharks don't have that ability. They just have the mouth. And they're going to sense their environment using that. That's why, and this again, I know I've gone on a few sidetracks and rampages here, but it's why we hear the term great white shark attack so often. And this is, I'll be honest, it kind of pisses me off. I don't think with a straight face you can say a great white shark attack. Like, it's a 20-foot macro predator. It will destroy you. It's not there. There should never be an attack. There should be fatality, Mortal Kombat victory, like something flashes on the screen. But we don't have that because these animals aren't vicious killers. Like, it's how they sense their world around them. And again, as was just mentioned, it's the equivalent of a kid putting something in their mouths, but they don't have mom to slap it away, and they don't have the hand to pull it back out. So again, please, 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 as future zookeepers, whenever you hear the word great white shark attack, just roll your eyes and say, I mean, I apologize if I don't want to downplay what happens to the victims of the attack, but it's not an attack. It's the animal feeling out, sensing its own world. It would be great white shark death or nothing. Yeah, man.
Yeah, like if the great white sharks had more of like the bull shark mentality, maybe they would come out to be the big scary monsters movies have portrayed them as, but they tend not to be. They just are giant sharks living their life and tasting things. And if they really wanted to attack and eat something, they have the absolute power to do so. But yeah.
Man, thank you guys. This input's awesome. I love hearing from everybody else, like echoing these sentiments. Yeah, like, and again, I 100% am not downplaying anybody who's been victimized by great whites, but the term great white shark wouldn't exist, just like was just said, like if they had bull shark mentality. It would be never saw a person again. That would be the end of the story. Nobody would be like going back out into the ocean with one leg or one arm. It's literally like a taste test. That's what they're doing. Otherwise, it would be game over. We don't stand a chance against them. I can say this, I think with, and again, I might have to, yeah, I'll just say it. I might have to do some research and see if I have to retract my statement. But there's nobody that survived a great white shark attack because they were stronger. Yeah, it's a sensory thing. It's how they interact with their world. And I know everybody here has heard the old myth of, oh, a person on a surfboard looks just like a seal, and that's why they're testing you out. Like, but that's exactly what they're doing. But it has nothing to do with them predating upon you. If a great white shark wanted to eat you, it would. And that's why we have so many attacks and not fatalities. So I don't know. I think they get a really bad rap. And again, because of this alleged bad rap that actually doesn't exist, we wipe them out, then have to wait 35 years for sexually mature adults to propagate a new generation. We're 70 years behind the game right now, as it stands. When Jaws came out till now, we're just now waiting on a new generation to see what the numbers are going to be. And with you guys going out in the field, if you want to put in 70 years swimming with great whites, let me know if we get one more generation. It makes things really tough. It's. I will say this though, from all the tangents I've gone on today, use this as inspiration, not getting too down on yourself or down on the field. My job, I feel, as an instructor is to always get you guys right to the point where you're like, wow, this is hopeless. And then just that little bit extra to go out there and change something about it. So, I mean, we're talking great white guys, like go out and study them. That's awesome. Don't let all this beat you down enough mentally that you get out of this field or lose interest.
I'd like to add off that really quick, Alex. Not to continue the
No,
rant.
please.
It's not a rant. It's a discussion. I didn't mean to say that. But I think for anyone going into this kind of field, not only is it really rewarding, but at times it's super hard. It's hard for the people that don't want to also care for these animals, and it's hard to get people interested in the animals. But as soon as you can do that, you can feel very rewarded. But in the meantime, there will always be someone that's against you, or sometimes even the whole world against you, and it's your job to make sure that these animals have a voice, because there's no way that they can come up online and say, so here, we have a problem. And it's important to try to encourage others, and us as keepers and individuals also in the field, to encourage each other that we need to keep moving forward as well.
Well said. And maybe, you know what, that actually changed my perspective on things. Maybe I'll alter how I give that speech of, like, don't let it get you too down. Maybe do let it get you too down and realize that the animals can't do anything about it. I like that sentiment. It's true. Like, just a couple days ago, I was talking to one of my grads who works at a zoo close by. I won't single this person out, but they were really struggling with guest interaction and how, again, it's so funny because we're a weird snobby group in an odd way, where like if guests come in and don't use the proper terminology, we're like, get out. But yeah, maybe that's a much better way to put it. The student that graduated with us was really struggling with guest interactions and how to inspire instead of just correct and do all that. So it's always going to beat you down, this field. Guys, if this was a easy battle to win, none of you, like, I wouldn't teach. You guys wouldn't be in this class. So yeah, I really like that. Thank you so much for saying that. I think I might change how I give my little spiel from now on, because maybe the whole point is to get you down a little bit, but the animals don't have a way to fight back. So maybe that's your guys' job going forward. I like that a lot. All right. That was awesome. Sorry, I'm having a moment here with all the interaction and people chiming in. Great stuff coming in. I'm trying to get focused back on the Ampullae of Lorenzini. Very fun, strange word to say. But this is basically when we talked about hammerhead sharks, how they spread that sensory organ over the rostrum and they separate it out over the cephalofoil. Here we have a very concentrated but much more advanced version of what's going on with the hammerheads. The Ampullae of Lorenzini is always present. It's how all chondrichthyes, I was going to say sharks, but even rays too, sense their environment around them. With great whites, from what we know, it's the most advanced sensory structure in the history of animal kind. Okay, so let's take, I'm just going to say shark. Take your generic shark. They're able to tell if a fish is swimming nearby, pumping its muscles, using its tail, its fins, things like that, breathing, using its gills, what have you. Your average generic shark is going to be able to sense movement around it without having to visualize it. Great whites are, I mean, this is like Professor X reading people's minds, able to detect things that aren't there, that aren't visible to the naked eye. The Ampullae of Lorenzini on great whites is so advanced that they're able to detect, again, as you can see on your screen, electromagnetic fields within a 500 millionth. Let that number register in your head for a second. 500 millionth of a volt. That means they can detect animals that are not moving or doing anything simply from their heart beating. And this is also what winds up being their downfall in captivity. Think about it for a second. If you're, and I feel like I'm okay to comment on this because my wife is very much like, she gets very overwhelmed if there's too much noise going on. She very quickly gets like very stressed out, like panic attack. If the kids are being loud and there's a video playing and there's music on and Alexa, things like that, she very quickly gets stressed out. That's, and my wife won't watch this video, so it's okay. That's nothing compared to a great white shark's sensory organ if they're kept in a captive environment. Picture what's going on with an aquarium setup. You're enclosed. You know you have to have filtration. So there's motors going on, engines, pumps, filters. Now you've got guests going. They've observed, and again, we can't ask the animals, but they can observe, and again, don't quote me on this. This is just what we know so far. If, let's say, a great white shark was in an aquarium, they can detect when you walk in the room and feel your heartbeat from outside the glass. It's that sensitive towards their environment. When we talk about spy hopping in just a second, they've been known to stick their nose out of the water to see where seals are on an island. They can detect a heartbeat of a seal that's on the beach before they even head towards it. So it just becomes sensory overload. And we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but this feels like a good slide to stop on and talk about it. This is why they can't be kept in captivity. They exhibit what we call rostrum rubbing. Basically, what they do is they hit the side of the glass or their enclosure and try to destroy their own Ampullae of Lorenzini. It's literally the equivalent of the fire alarm going off and you plugging your ears. All you want to do is get rid of that sensory organ that's taking on all the stimuli that you can't handle anymore. And so it makes them impossible to study to the fullest because we cannot keep them. They it drives them crazy, basically. It's not fair to the animal. Obviously, we want to study them, but there's so much working against it because they're so advanced and unique. Speaking of advanced and unique, get ready. We haven't even started shark lecture yet with great whites, because here we go. It brings us to the Retimurable, or the wonderful net. The wonderful net's maybe one of the coolest things that can be studied with animals, and great whites exhibit it better than anyone. I don't even know where to start, because this gets me hyped up. I think it's just the coolest thing ever. So let's do this real quick. We'll go back to that slide. If we were in a standard classroom setting, I would do my amazing drawings on the whiteboard. Instead, I'll try this. If you picture a duck, this is exactly how a duck looks, by the way. Do a wing. Standing on a pond that is frozen over. You'll almost always see them standing with one leg. We know that birds aren't technically endotherms, so they're not warm-blooded necessarily, but they're not ectotherms. They're not cold-blooded, quote unquote, like a reptile would be. What they do is they have countercurrent heat exchange. And hopefully those of you that have taken birds have learned about this. I think birds are the best example. We know, here's a heart. That's how I would draw it for, yeah, that's for Valentine's Day. So here's the heart. Blood coming out of the heart, arterial blood, is warm. Let's say this foot is touching the ice, so that means blood cools down and heads back to the heart. So with a normal animal, that typically would be too much of a shock for the heart to handle. You can't be pumping out warm arterial blood and then receiving freezing cold venous blood. So what birds do is almost like a DNA helix. So picture this as the inside of the bird's leg. And please, guys, let me know if I can explain this better. I know my drawings aren't good. So we have a DNA helix structure, pretty primitive, but we have what's called countercurrent heat exchange, where venal and arterial blood run next to each other. And so you kind of split the difference as far as heat. You don't have freezing cold blood going back. You have slightly warmer blood going back to the heart with slightly colder blood going down to the foot, if that makes sense. It's, again, obviously advanced evolution-wise, but a very primitive setup. They're basically right next to each other. So it's warm both ways instead of hot and cold either way. I hope that is an okay analogy. Because it's a cool, understudied, under-talked about evolutionary adaptation. With poikilothermic animals, that's how birds exist, basically. They have a nice, this is the wonderful net. They have a nice net. They have a pretty okay net. With the wonderful net, or Retimurable, we have two unique things functioning here, and both are just absolutely incredible. They've actually taught us a lot about animals that came long before, or I shouldn't say long before sharks, long ago with sharks. Taught us how basically dinosaurs moved. So what we have here is, instead of the amazing drawing I'll do again, instead of a bird being like this, warm blood down, cold blood up, here we have this and this. It's so intertwined, the way venal and arterial blood move against one another, that it winds up almost heating up because of the movement. And this is further amplified by the fact that these animals are so heavily bodied. And we wind up with one of, if not my favorite, animal adaptations out there, and that's with the theory of gigantothermy. Gigantothermy means that because of this arterial and venal setup, and the fact that these animals are so densely packed, their musculature is so heavy and strong, and we've got it's layers upon layers upon layers of intertwining blood vessels, that instead of being cold-blooded, you border on warm-blooded just by moving. And that's really important to understand. With gigantothermy, and this, again, I think it's so cool because it taught us about dinosaurs. Those of you that have taken reptiles and herps, like, you know all about the fact that like an animal would have to sun itself in order to get energy. But picture a T-Rex. Like, it would have to wait all day just to get the batteries slightly charged, and by then it's nighttime just to move. Turns out that's not how it works. All you need is a big enough body that you start moving. And again, I don't know if this will resonate with everyone, but if your battery in your car has ever died, picture putting the jumper cables onto your battery and you start your car. You can take the jumper cables off, and just running your car starts charging the battery again. That's basically what's happening with gigantothermy. Because the animal's so big, just moving tissue creates kinetic energy, which then heats up the blood, which then runs against venal and arterial, respectively. And the animal's going to run 25, 30 degrees warmer than the environment around it just for moving. To further add to how cool that is, great whites are able to direct that extra warm blood to the areas of the body it's needed. So gills, if they're just swimming, fins, if they're fin and tail, if the animal's migrating, and then stomach, if the animal's eating. So much with gigantothermy is just incredible, and it's taught us so much about animals from the past. With the term gigantothermy, we've also come up with a few other colloquial terms. Ectothermic hemiothermy. It's the idea that an animal can warm itself up just by moving. It's like being outside when it's cold and rubbing your hands together. You've done nothing to create heat, but the kinetic energy is starting to warm your hands up. Your body's not doing if that makes sense. It's the movement. And so gigantothermy, we've learned from great whites how dinosaurs were basically able to start up and move, because logically it doesn't make sense. If it's a reptile that's sitting there, you'd have to wait 14 hours to charge up the battery on a brontosaurus, and by then it's nighttime again. Now we know all you need is that initial kick, and just by the kinetic energy of your body functioning, you're able to transport yourself, eat, digest, and process. Great whites took it another step and are able to direct the blood flow where they want it. So it's a step up of an already very efficient model. Again, I know for me personally, I wish that the fatter I got, the more efficient I got. That was definitely not the case, but should at least put into perspective how much more efficient great whites are than ourselves. So we talked about this earlier. Here's just, the slide for it. The depths at which they migrate all depend on what they were feeding on. And we didn't know that for a long time until we started placing trackers on these animals. We noticed the exact same migration patterns, but we also noticed extreme differences in depths. And it all has to do with the, again, fatty, oily liver density of these animals. We have a very, it's not quite on par with hammerhead sharks, but a very unique social structure. We have a definite dominance hierarchy, meaning there's always a dominant species. However, there's absolutely no rules to it, which makes things very confusing. There's always been, in all these groups, which are called shivers, there's always been a dominant animal, but it has kind of no rules. Could be the adult female, could be a juvenile, could be the male that sired offsprings. It literally has no rules. It's prison rules. It's whoever's respected the most, I guess, in that environment, which makes it, again, very hard to track. The fact that we don't know more about this, like any of you that are interested in training behavior, if you can look at this and not be intrigued, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. We have a clear dominance hierarchy with absolutely no regulations as to how that is set. It also changes depending on migration. So maybe the fastest, maybe the largest. Thanks, buddy. Yeah, it's very difficult to nail down, which makes them all that more intriguing. So a shiver is the actual term assigned to a group of sharks. Stop saying bubble bath. A shiver is a group of sharks, I think aptly named. Does have a couple other names, but it usually is species dependent. This is kind of your go-to terminology. Again, there's an alpha, and there seems to be ranking, i.e. like a second in command, third. But again, without knowing how they select this order, makes it difficult to understand. And before anybody comments, I know there's not a real alpha in a wolf pack. That's all been dispelled. But for the sake of this, there's a dominant. The, I guess, difficult part to explain is how often the dominant member of the society changes. And through, believe it or not, from what we've observed again, so I guess I can't say it 100%, absolutely no aggression. And that's very hard to understand. There's no fights that happen. There's no, I bit this guy's fin off, now I run the clan, I run the shiver. So yeah, it's tough to put your finger on them. And again, if you're one of these students that is really interested in that behavior side of things, man, what a cool opportunity to jump in and look at this. They alternate roles within their shiver based off question mark. There's no fighting. There's no ramming heads. There's, again, without anthropomorphizing, that does lead us to, we have to jump to the conclusion that these animals are way more intelligent than we initially gave them credit for. They're taking on, or at least interpreting, social cues that we can't figure out. So definitely cool stuff to study there if the behavior route's something you want to do. Speaking of behavior, that moves us to spy hopping, excuse me. It's really not found anywhere else in the world, and it seems really silly. Definitely a very advanced behavior. The idea of projecting the rostrum out of the water in order to get a better view is really unheard of. You're an animal that lives in the water. What do you care what's going on land? With these animals, obviously moving towards more mammalian prey, spy hopping does make sense. But from what we can tell, again, from the limited research we've done, that Ampullae of Lorenzini, you're not only looking at a seal on an island, you're figuring out heartbeats and getting like a predator image of a thermal scanner reading of the island itself. So a lot going on. There's just spy hopping seems so trivial, but it's really not found anywhere else. Oddly enough, the only other animal to do it, orcas. The one mammalian predator of great white sharks. So interesting here, because we know for a fact that orcas don't have the Ampullae of Lorenzini to detect things around them, but their visual cues and the way they behave, I don't know, just everything about the way they interact and behave like great white sharks is very notable. And like I said, it's crazy to me that there's not more confirmed scientific research. This is some of the coolest stuff out there. And the fact that we don't have, the fact that I can't add even more slides to this is beyond me. So just food for thought. Speaking of food for thought, let's move to diet. Believe it or not, dietary, I guess, restrictions or lifestyles drives how sharks operate. I mentioned earlier, your entire job as a great white shark is to get big, fast, and strong enough in order to predate on mammals. But you have to start off small. You start off with fish. You focus primarily on osteichthyes, which are the bony fish, so your traditional like pet store fish. Very few feed on other chondrichthyes. It's been observed, but typically you're just swimming along, eating fish until you put on enough mass, which is actually hard to do. Again, because of how dense you want your body packed. You have to eat a lot more fish than would be understandable for another species of your size. Your main goal is to hit this mile mark with pinnipeds, and this actually I should change this. Pinnipeds, then cetacea. Pinnipeds are all your seals, and I know they've been classified now separately with your eared, non-eared seals, whatever. It's seals, and cetacea being whales. This is a pattern. It has to start with fish, then you move to pinnipeds. This is your prime time, and then later in life, cetacea. The goal that you're trying to hit, picture this like a bodybuilding competition. The goal you're moving towards is 10 feet. It's because by then, again, you're not hardening the skeleton or the bones. I guess the analogy would be like a baby's head when they're born, how their cranium's still soft. Kind of the same idea, except we're using cartilage in place of that. In this case, instead of the head becoming solidified, we've got enough cartilage in the jaw that it's ready to take on some very serious, and like I said, with the elephant seals, maybe even bigger than you, prey. Here's the iconic imagery everyone knows and loves. Hunting down seals. Mammalian prey that is aquatic and oceanic, covered and filled with blubber. Blubber does two things for you. It's the good fat these animals want. It helps bulk up, but it also adds oil to the liver, which is how these animals control their buoyancy. So you literally can't get enough of this. I guess it'd be the avocado of the aquatic world. It's that good fat that you want. And again, while this image is so iconic with the shark breach capturing a seal, there's a lot that's, like, I guess, behind the scenes or leading up to this moment. Great white sharks aren't born and start hunting seals. They work their whole lives to get to this point. This is like a CEO. We should be proud of them. This is like a college graduate right here. They've worked a long time to get to this point of seal hunting. The way we found a lot of this out, and this is where the Bassy Hill is gonna kind of come in to play. And again, what was brought up earlier with great whites attacking humans. They did what I have to imagine is the coolest study ever. Like, I don't care who you are, this has to be one of the coolest studies you could ever be on. They basically drove a speedboat around in great white shark infested waters and threw out the corpses of other animals to see which ones great white sharks would bite. They used a seal, a natural prey item these animals would seek out, a pig, and a sheep. I'll give this a second to resonate and think what the great white sharks actually did with it. I think that maybe before this lecture even, or to certainly the layperson, everybody would be like, oh, they ate everything. Sharks smell blood in the water type thing. Yeah, that didn't happen. We actually found out a lot about it. These sharks attacked all 3 baits. They went up and either bit off a chunk or nibbled on. And again, I hope nibble isn't taken too lightly here. That's a pretty serious nibble. But they attacked all 3 baits. They always spit out or threw out the sheep carcass. Let's think about that. Again, we're looking for blubbery, high good fat content in a person or in a prey item. We want to seek out what's going to help us with buoyancy and what's going to pack on the most bang for your buck as far as solidifying our core. Think about how important this is as far as evolutionary history. You're a shark. Your main job is to just eat and grow big. And you're willing to spit out prey items that don't have a good nutritional label on it. It almost seems like they're counting calories. And in reality, they kind of are. It's not worth it for them to chase after, swim, bite, consume, attack, fight off, all the energy expenditures if the prey item isn't worth that to you, if that makes sense. Seals, pigs, both very fat, rich animals. Blubber, bacon, you name it. They're animals that meet the profile of what these animals desire as far as their nutritional needs. And it doesn't make sense to use energy accepting anything less. The sensory detection system here, very tied into sense of smell. But again, I want sense of smell to come with that little asterisk or that caveat. Smell's made up of a lot of things. It's not like the whole blood in the water thing. Yeah, that's true. But you're also smelling any nitrogenous compounds, any decay, any waste. With the Ampullae of Lorenzini, now all of a sudden you're detecting movement in the water, a heartbeat, struggling. Any of these, like sense of smell, I feel like I'm doing a disservice to sharks to say that they just smell stuff. They do so much more, especially when you factor in spy hopping. They've got the lateral line system that gives them the detection of any movement around them. It also detects water quality parameters. Like this whole slide should just be crossed out and said they know what's going on. They have a full ADT security system. They know if you're in their front lawn, back patio. Like there's so much complexity here. It doesn't feel like I'm doing them right with this one slide, but we do have other stuff to talk about, like the bass eel. The bass eel is, as much as we've talked about and as much as I've geeked out about all the adaptations these animals have, this one ranks up there. It's top 3 for sure. This basically becomes the tongue of the animal, and it's a cartilaginous tongue, so there is some actual structure behind it. But this is, if anybody does like Weight Watchers, and I think there's some new apps out there. I'm very behind the times. Some new apps out there that you can scan like the barcode on something or a menu item, and you know the calorie printout, you know the carbs and everything else. This is basically a built-in item or ingredient list. It's so efficient and so quick with how it functions. It's almost astounding. Like this would, again, as some of the other things we've found with sharks, would be a really cool adaptation to have. You could immediately bite into a piece of food and digitally in your head get a printout of the caloric intake, the saturated fats, the carbs, all this stuff. It immediately sends to them a readout of the dietary makeup of that food item. With this, this is how we know about the sheep study where they rejected the sheep. It's literally sends a message to the brain that says, hey, it's not worth it to even continue to pursue this item because it's not going to give us the caloric intake or the fat intake we really need. That's why they'll spit out the sheep. And they do this immediately upon biting. As was mentioned earlier, with shark attacks. That's the only way they have to interact with the sensory world around them. When they do come up, and again, not trying to take away from anyone who is a shark attack victim, but a lot of the times, like you hear the story of the surfer that has their leg taken off by a great white shark, that's because it's just the leg. They probably, and unfortunately, spit that leg out. We are not part of their diet. No matter what your body condition score is currently, we in no way compare to the blubber and fat content of an elephant seal type thing. If you actually think about it, like, and yeah, we're humans, it's cool and stuff. We can walk upright, we have thumbs, like, good for us. But if you really think about the makeup of a person, it's nowhere near anything a shark would want. It's bone, maybe some muscle if you've worked out a lot, and then just kind of meh. We are pound for pound not very nutritional for animals, if that makes sense. A lot of our body's dedicated to smooth muscle tissue, so viscera, which, depending on the organism predating upon you, a lot of animals aren't super into intestines. And then, like, take a human leg, for example, it's not really high up there. Like, I don't know how to describe it better. Like, it's not on these animals' menu. They take one bite, and again, it's a big bite. That's a great white shark taking your leg off. But immediately after, they're usually kind of done with the whole ordeal. It's not something they wanted to sample. It's cool. It's like having a little appetizer, but yeah, that's not what I want to order for my final meal. Honestly, a lot of the shark attack victims that actually succumb or die from shark attacks are, unfortunately, usually what they do is bleed out. So let's, again, just as an example, you're way out in the ocean trying to catch that huge wave. Shark comes up, takes a little nibble / takes off your leg. And then while you're trying to come back to shore, you bleed out. But usually the shark is miles, well, not miles, but you get the idea, is far away from you at the time. And while, yes, they're responsible for your death, it wasn't truly like a shark death attack. They came up, investigated the best way they know how, weren't interested, and then moved on to other opportunities for them. It really tells you a lot about the technology, I guess, that's installed in that Bassie-hill, that within one bite, you'll even spit the item out. Not even just, all right, I'll take this one bite. This is like going out and sampling wine, where it's like you won't even swallow the wine, you spit it into that gross bucket. Just crazy to me that an animal this size and this dedicated to hunting would turn down an opportunity to eat, but they do, because it's not worth they have a calculation in their brain of energy I'm going to put towards consuming this, how much is it actually going to be used? So yeah, again, very interesting there. Bassie-hill, again, sitting basically here at the floor of the mouth. It does have some cartilage to it, so it's shark tongue is fine as far as how we're describing it today. But it's almost a plate that goes up and almost like the little digital food scale some people have in their kitchen. It's how it's going to operate. And it's going to give you that exact readout of what prey you're trying to consume and its nutritional content versus your energy for it. Quickly, though, if we're going to talk about the bass eel, we have to stop here and talk about these, depending on your personality, your love for animals, these adorable little guys. Here we have your cookie cutter sharks. The cookie cutter sharks they're hilarious. They're really funny. They're actually really interesting. But also give us a cool look into how important the bass eel is. Basically what they've done is they've sacrificed the ability to do that, again, kind of nutritional label ability. They've sacrificed that and transitioned the bass eel into a cigar cutter. Instead of a digital kitchen scale with the readout, it now transitions to sliding up and helping push the teeth. But the reason it's so important to point these animals out is because you've lost that digital display, if you will, of nutrition. You don't always know what you're eating. These animals are notorious for I even have a buddy, so I actually have someone with personal experience with them. They've been known on like offshore oil rigs, things like that. They'll go up and chew on the tubing. They don't know whether or not they're ingesting rubberized pipe, a fish, a dead shark, because they've lost that almost, it's like losing your sense of taste. It's probably a good analogy for it. They leave exact cookie cutter shape marks in whatever, and we've seen them on the side of metal submarines. Certainly, like I said, underwater drilling, welding, things like that. Air supply hoses, things like that. They don't know necessarily what they're ingesting because they've lost that digital readout. Down here, I typically would show this if we were in class. I occasionally have my kids come in for this lecture. This is the Octonauts. If you guys have ever seen that. If you haven't, it's awesome. I think it's PBS, maybe Nickelodeon cartoon where they explore underwater. My kid's actually watching it right now in the background. But they actually do a pretty good speech on how cookie cutter sharks work. Very cool animal, though, and we have to kind of tip our hats to them real quick. Here's the wound sites they make. Usually not fatal, but very prevalent, and they don't really care where they go, what they eat, any of that stuff. And like I said, we've literally seen cookie cutter shark marks on submarines. So they're trying to chomp into metal. And it's because they've sacrificed that traditional bass eel model in order to do that. So just like I said earlier with the unfortunate cases of human life loss pertaining to great whites, it's almost always from bleeding out, and that's really how they operate with other mammalian prey as well. They're still cool, very effective predators, but let's just be honest here. Nature's incredibly cruel. There's not a lot of cool stories where the shark flies out of the water and eats the seal in one bite and everything's happy. The main goal of a great white shark is to disable mobility and not allow you back to shore. That's it. They'll eat you in their own time. It's very similar to what we see with crocodiles and alligators, where the actual way you die from a crocodile or an alligator is typically from drowning. Same here. You know you're attacking a mammal. You know they need to go to the surface. You know they want to get back on shore. So what you're going to do is take out the rudders or the steering portion of the body, and then you'll just kind of sit back and wait for the animal to bleed out right in front of you. They've been known to drag their prey down and just hold them without doing anything. They don't shake their heads, anything like that. They'll drag them down, hold them underwater and literally drown the animal and then consume them at their leisure. Nature's pretty raw, guys. Like it's not a fun world out there, and great whites are a great example of that. It's not always this huge killer blow. It's just enough to hamper whatever survival mechanisms the prey item has in tow. You'll see this a lot, which again, I think speaks to the misinformation that's out there about great white sharks. I don't know, it's just, you can't have this animal that's the scariest thing on earth. We need to go wipe them all out. And then there's so many shark attacks or like close calls with these animals. They're out there using arguably the most efficient model possible. You got a digital readout of the nutrition content. You've got an efficient way to dispatch your prey without absorbing any energy from you outside of what's necessary. You're not going to do anything above the norm. And you're just trying to hunt in the most efficient way possible, not the most savage or YouTube worthy, I guess. They've developed some interesting adaptations. It, again, I think speaks to their intelligence. We'll have to wait for more studies to come back about it. But they've been observed hunting dolphins from basically diagonally behind them so that their echolocation won't give them away. Again, they've got counter shading working for them. So just crazy, cool, advanced stuff. They are so far above and beyond these giant, stupid killing machines that we thought they were. There's a lot going on with these animals. When they do hone in on a prey item, their speeds are incredible. They basically float along until they want to jam, and then they will get to it. 25 miles an hour underwater, that's cooking. That's really fast. They will, on occasion, continue to chase their prey item if the first hit is unsuccessful, but it's pretty rare. They usually are going for one shot, and then they can follow your now disabled or crippled prey until they can, again, kind of eat at their leisure. The prey items they'll focus on, again, are very tied to body size. And again, with an animal like this, we don't know if they're scavenging, if they're predating, if they're hunting, but we found almost anything in the ocean in their stomachs. So we know that they have a wide variety of items on the menu. It's just how much energy they have to expend in order to consume that. This brings up the tail end of the lecture and the great white shark's life cycle. And it's one of the most interesting components of them as a species, because we really only find this in great whites. And again, we've only observed it here and there. The actual instances of being able to observe this are rare. They're few and far between. Excuse me, guys. And this all ties to whale fall. Whale fall, for those of you that don't know, is a monumentous change to an ecosystem. It's when a whale, let's just, for the sake of today, say it's from natural causes, has died, it bloats, it floats to the surface, and then it's going to sink down and change an ecosystem for 20 years. You got to figure and again, let's just use this for an example. A blue whale has died because it got old. It bloats. Animals can consume it there. They're tearing off pieces. Its carcass falls. You go to a benthic environment that's very deep down, and all of a sudden you're looking at sea stars. All the animals we've talked about this entire semester go from scavenging and hoping for food to a blue whale being down there, it changes that ecosystem forever. However, before it gets to sink down, we have a very strange, again, very infrequently observed phenomenon occur with great whites. Whales make up easily the best kind of blubber to protein ratio out there. The nutrients needed for a great white shark to function, basically, a great white could live its entire life with one blue whale carcass. So that shows you the importance of the nutritional content of that animal. So we've found a new wrinkle in this whole great white shark story, and that's with the initial part of whale fall. We haven't actually observed great whites taking down an animal like a blue whale. Typically, this is when the animal's died already of another instance. But what happens is really, really unique. So one of the things we talked about was the lack of the nictitating membrane. Remember every Jaws movie or nature show you've seen, the eyes go white when they're actually biting or eating or leaping out of the water? Turns out it's not a nictitating membrane, as we mentioned. It's why they moved groups from the carchariniforms. It's ocular rotation. They literally roll their eyes back, almost looking at their brain, to protect the pupil. Let me go one slide ahead. That's what it typically looks like. That's your average shark encounter. And again, we thought it was a nictitating membrane, but they're rolling their eyes backwards. This helps them. They have their eyes open basically to the last minute, and instead of shutting the eyelids, they roll the eyes back, bite down, and brace for whatever's coming for them, whatever thrashing the prey item might do. Just a sec. Sorry, guys. This highlights, I think, how crazy weird whale fall is for these animals. Your adult, mature animals, you're talking about 25 to 30 pounds per bite per mouthful. And you're talking about, I mean, to say gorging, I feel is almost an understatement. An animal that's going to consume so much in one sitting, hundreds of pounds. That's crazy to think about. We're not going to see that much in the mammalian world. 25 pounds a bite and hundreds of pounds overall. They're doing work. That's a lot to do. But with whale fall, this is where all the studies come in. You can see from this picture here, the shark is taking a massive, let's say 25 or 30 pound bite of whale blubber. Notice the eyes, they're not rolled back. They're not going to exhibit ocular rotation when predating upon deceased whale carcasses. And again, guys, the sample size is small. So if 10 years from now we actually start studying our oceans, you can come back and tell me I'm wrong. I will update my PowerPoint then, but this is where we're at so far. When these animals are feeding, we're using the bass eel again. It's been observed, and again, sample size small, but let's just go with what we got. They've been observed taking bites out of the animal and turning around and basically spitting it out. It's the general assumption that they're going for high fat content. They want more blubber versus maybe, like, let's say internal organs or things like that. So they'll be tearing into this blue whale, and if something's not desirable right away, they'll spit that out and it just falls to the ocean floor. They are there for a reason. It's like a Thanksgiving buffet. If you don't like drumsticks, have a slice of breast meat type thing. They know what they're there to eat. They know what they're about. And this is further complicated with the behaviors they exhibit. The animals themselves seem to, and again, I guess the Thanksgiving turkey is a great example because it's going to come up here again. They basically sit there and continue to eat until they almost go into that food coma. That, again, kind of what you feel at the end of a Thanksgiving dinner. They get to the point where they're actually just chewing, but not even tearing anything off. And believe it or not, they get so satiated, they sink, is basically what happens. They'll sit there and chew, and again, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of whale blubber in your stomach. And then you're basically gnawing on what's left, picking over the leftovers. And then you just kind of fall asleep, I guess would be a good example, and sink down to the ocean floor, however deep it is. And during this crazy Thanksgiving buffet of whale carcass, it's hard to describe. They basically, yes, it's a feeding frenzy, but they seem to be almost in a trance-like state. I think that's probably a good example. They are all eating very rapidly, consuming a ton of food, spitting out pieces they don't want. And during this feeding frenzy, we've observed, again in our limited numbers, occasionally they're almost zombies at this point. They've taken chunks out of each other, so other great whites that are there, and there's no retaliatory behavior. They're bumping into each other, they're biting each other, spitting that piece out, but the person that got, let's say, a fin ripped off doesn't turn around and say, hey, what's your deal, man? They're all honed in on this whale carcass, trying to get the best blubber content available to them. The behavior's weird. We've got these weird social groupings where there's absolutely no aggression. We've got no ocular rotation. And on top of all that, we've observed that every animal participating in this is extremely large. Again, if you go back a couple slides, 10 foot is your optimal range to be hunting seals. We find that every animal predating upon whales is 15 to 16 feet, meaning they're very mature, probably nearing the end of their lives, as full grown as they'll ever be. And that's led us and scientists to a very interesting theory that hopefully, again, you guys will go out and prove. And that's mobility versus reproduction. The mobility theory states that basically an animal's whole goal is to get to 10 feet, hunt seals, do your best. Eventually, you've taken on enough seals and you've eaten enough very blubber and protein rich foods that you get too big to hunt seals anymore. That amazing breach photos that are iconic for everyone, you don't see a 20-foot shark doing that. You see a 10 to 12-foot shark doing that. And so the mobility theory states that once the animals get big enough, they start to seek out whales instead. This requires a lot more than just looking for whales. There's some science out there that suggests they alter the Ampullae of Lorenzini to no longer seek out tiny flutters of seal hearts, but actually try to detect where huge-bodied cetacean or whale prey might be. Following pods of whales, but not attacking anything, waiting for a whale to pass or get separated, things like that. It suggests a rearticulation and a redesign of the entire Ampullae of Lorenzini. The reproduction theory, we have no idea about. That's why reproduction is not highlighted, and theory definitely is. There is the thought out there that basically this serves as a giant aphrodisiac you've got all these animals. There's no juveniles. There's no like teenager there or little kid interrupt dinner. All these very obviously mature, probably sexually and reproductively viable animals that are there. This is like a giant oyster buffet or dark chocolate, whatever your aphrodisiac of choice is. And the idea is that basically you consume a ton of optimal food for your lifestyle. What better time than to reproduce because you've loaded up. It's like taking a protein shake before you're going to start producing offspring. So there is the theory out there that basically and sorry for the analogy, but it is what it is. You have this giant turkey buffet, sink down to the bottom and wake up in a giant food coma orgy. It does make a lot of sense. It's never been proven or followed up with, but it makes a lot of sense that the optimal time for mating would be right after you've had the best meal of your life, basically, and you're loaded up on all the nutrients that it takes to create a 4-foot great white shark. So yeah, the theory's there, the proof not yet. With that, hopefully this highlights just how far behind we are. We don't know about reproductive cycles. We know they're pregnant for about a year. That's really long for a fish, or in this case, a almost invertebrate. And we don't know what's going on in intrauterine, whether or not there's oophagy, which again is the consumption of the eggs, or adelphophagy, which is the consumption of living siblings in that intrauterine cavity. We just simply don't know enough about it yet, and we really should. With that being said, I don't think I need to pull up YouTube or show you guys other videos out there of great whites. Do your own research. Go out there in the world. Figure out what these animals are all about. Because, man, hopefully, as I hope I've given you enough information, but hopefully you're still thirsty for more. And this is ignites a passion for you to go out and explore more about our animal world.